So what we're looking at today is taking charge of our shoulder pain. I'm going to go through a few things to do with what we're talking about today. I'm going to run through a few things that we talked about in last session when I was talking about the knee, and we're going to go into a few different graphics that will directly correlate with what we'll talk about today, touch base on those, and then run through the injury prevention side of things, how to adjust what we're working with and what we're doing in the gym for our shoulder injuries specifically. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to be going over in-depth injuries the way I did with the knee. Today's going to be a little bit more of a broader one because the shoulder's got a lot more going on with it. So I want to give a good understanding of the shoulder itself first and the different types of injuries that can occur with that. So to get started, first thing we're going to do is identify what can or has gone wrong with the shoulder. We're going to learn a little about the inner workings of the shoulder joint itself. We're going to go through exercises that we can use for aiding in recovery and rehab. Then we're going to go over preventative measures to make sure that, one, it doesn't happen again, but also that we have the best chance going forwards to not feel any pain. That's the main thing about what we're doing today. So that's the core sort of situation that we'll be going through. First thing, I want to go over the shoulder in general. So as I said before, it's a little bit more in depth than the knee just because of how much it does. So the shoulder joint itself can go through abduction, adduction, external, internal rotations. It can go through flexion and extension. So there's lots of different moving pieces that need to allow our shoulder to go through all those different movements. When we have an injury in our shoulder, for example, I'll use a really quick one. You'd go to the doctor or your physio, and one of the first and most common exercises that they'll give you with your shoulder rehab is just a bit of external rotation. Now, if we look at the shoulder joint in itself and how it can do all these things I just listed, this is not going to be enough to correct what's going on in the shoulder. Even if it is correcting the exact issue with the external part of the rotation in our rotator cuff, it's not going to be strengthening everything else that's involved in your shoulder. So we want to be able to understand the entire workings of the shoulder, run through exactly how we can strengthen or fix whatever's going on in each area of the shoulder as well, rather than just having a singular motion to try and be the magic sort of fix that it never really is. So first thing, as I said before, I want to go over a few things from last week that will help with this. The first one is our load. So the goal eventually is to obviously return to action without feeling any pain. So it's going to improve the tolerance of load. It's going to relieve the pain. It's going to restore function of the shoulder to the extent that it will be. Oh, hang on, let me just add that. Vince, how you doing? So what was I? Sorry. Restore the function of the shoulder to its original capacity. The reason why we generally go overboard with the load is we'll be either putting too much effort or weight into it. The frequency of our exercise will be too much, or the volume, so the number of sets or reps that we're doing, is greater than what the capacity of our shoulder is to recover. So the goal of the load-based theory is to increase the capacity and reduce the load that we're putting over it so that we're able to recover in a proper standing. Going back to the boom bust cycle that I brought up last time as well with the knee, we're going to start with this scale here. The diagram is showing a gradual decrease in training load. So if you follow this red line, generally we have an increase at first. We start to feel a bit better. So if we're doing swimming, for example, I'm going for a couple of 100-meter swims just to sort of see how my shoulder's going. I feel good, so I increase it, and then I get a flare up and it drops right back down and I need to rest again. And it's just going to follow this same sort of path all the way down until we eventually stop because our shoulder's cooked. The reason why this is such a common thing and why so many people do this is our rehab, or the exercises we do to fix whatever's going on in our shoulder, generally only it's kind of like a Band-Aid approach, for lack of better words, where we want to fix it until we feel good. And then once we feel good, we go back to training exactly how we were, rather than building up slowly, strengthening everything in the shoulder that needs to be strengthened for it to maintain, not just have that quick fix. So if we look at what could happen if we do the reverse of this boom bust cycle, is if we have a gradual increase here, an improvement of function, because that's what we're looking for, an improvement of function, not necessarily a reduction in pain. As we increase up this scale, our first session here where we're like 3 out of 10 in pain and we swam 100 meters. We continue this same gradual increase of training without overdoing it. Eventually, we'll be able to get to a 500-meter swim and still be at that 3 out of 10 pain. Now, that 3 out of 10 pain isn't a negative because we're still at the 3 out of 10 that we were before. It's actually a positive because now we're putting an increased amount of load onto the joint and still having the same amount of pain as what we did back here. So I don't want you guys to ever think about the pain that we're feeling or the uncomfortability of a small injury or a minor breakdown of what could be happening in the shoulder to be, oh shit, I need to step back and not do anything, because it's just going to increase the amount of times we go through this boom bust cycle and have great progression all the way back down to nothing, and then great progression all the way back down to nothing, just because we've overdone it. So that is sort of the basis or baseline understanding I want you guys to take away from today, that we want to slowly and gradually increase the amount of activities we're doing, whether it be swimming, whether it be actual shoulder exercises to strengthen it, whether it be, I don't know, you might be an MMA fighter and you're going through your regular motions, or wrestling or anything like that. The slow gradual increase back to sport, whether it's a bad injury or whether it's just a niggle, is going to be the best option or best way forward, rather than trying to increase straight away and re-injure said shoulder. Now, going into the pain and injury types that I want to talk about today with the shoulder, I've done a little diagram. Well, it's not little, I should say. It's quite extensive, but I'll walk us through it very slowly so we have a bit of an understanding. Everyone see that okay? Let me just bring you in a little bit closer so you can see that clearly. I'm not the important thing, images are. So what we have here is the versions of injuries that we quite often see with the shoulder. So we have an impingement, we have tendonitis, and we have a rotator cuff tear. So I like to say that we have a bit more of a spectrum of pain rather than it could be one or the other, because I'm not going to go off scans that I've had done. This is for you guys who are trying to just get back to your normal functioning without having to go through physio, doctors, scans, and spend thousands of dollars just to get back on your feet. So an impingement, what that could be looking like is just a general pain doing day-to-day things. So it might not be if you've picked up a pen or you've done a slight rotation when you're opening a door. It could be whether you pick up a heavy coat that you want to chuck on and it's winter, and you pick it up out here and you go, oh, it's a bit sore. That's sort of what the impingement side of things is. It's generally on the abduction. So, sorry, let's just show the opposite of the camera. So the raising of the shoulder. Reason being, if we want to look at this little diagram here that I've roughly drawn up, the clavicle here and the AC joint specifically is quite often the area that we get this impingement. Reason being is there's a little gap here that I've scribbled red into, that's underneath where the humerus inserts into the shoulder socket joint, and there's a little gap above where the AC joint is there. Now, what that gap is enough room for us to be able to go through this abduction and raise. But if this starts to shorten because of inflammation or because the AC joint's not working the way it should be, that gap will shorten and create that little pinching feeling that you're getting there, which is the impingement. As I said, really specifically to abduction and raising of the arm. Now, if we don't adjust anything that we're doing, or we try and push through it, or we go through this boom bust cycle that I mentioned before, the spectrum of pain tends to increase, where we sort of go towards the tendonitis or the constant pain on a specific area. That could look like a dull ache after exercise in a really pinpoint spot. It can be pinpoint pain when we're doing something. I go to lift that coat that I did before, and now, ow, that's right there, right in the shoulder. I can feel exactly where it's coming from. What that looks like is more so through the tendons and ligaments themselves. You can get a lot of tightness and buildup. And the way I'd like to think of it is, imagine you've got your arm, your skin here. If I just sat there rubbing it quite vigorously, quite hard, until the point that it started to get a bit sore. I want you guys to do that now for me. So actually rub your skin. It's a little bit weird, but sit there and rub it and rub it and rub it, and it's going to get a bit red. It's going to feel uncomfortable. That's sort of what this impingement's creating into this tendonitis. We're overusing a certain area, and it's going to get to the point that that movement becomes so specifically sore in that spot, because using the same example of the AC joint, it's been pinching right up in here. So our supraspinatus, that attaches to the top of the shoulder here, right near our AC joint, is getting pinched over and over and over and over again. Every time you raise your arm, bam, it's there, bam, it's there. So just like that rubbing on our arm, it's going to get quite uncomfortable, all right? Now, unlike our arm and our skin, the tendons don't tend to heal as quickly. So you already feel quite good now, even though you just sort of kind of hurt yourself. It would take a week, 2 weeks of not really using it at all to get rid of or to lessen that amount of pain that you're feeling, because the tendons themselves take a lot longer to heal than, for example, our skin. Now, again, if we continue down the path of our spectrum of pain and we don't really do anything to help ourselves and we sort of just try and push through and ignore what our body's telling us, generally it gets to the point where we're feeling pain and rest. So like we could be just sitting down watching a movie and then my shoulder's quite sore. I didn't even do anything today, but my shoulder's really hurting, especially in that area that we talked about before with the pinpoint pain. That can eventually progress until we've got a rotator cuff tear. So again, keeping with the examples that we've used already, say we tear our supraspinatus right here, just below the AC joint. So this is our supraspinatus here, the red part that's attaching to the top of our humerus up here. The rest of the rotator cuffs are down, encapsulating the ball of the socket joint. The supraspinatus up here has been pushed and pushed and pushed to the point that now it's got a little tear in it. That can lead to a loss of function. Now, a loss of function doesn't necessarily mean that, oh shit, I can't raise my arm at all. What it means is I get to a certain point and either that pain is too much to continue increasing, or I get to a dead point where I don't necessarily feel a lot of pain, but my arm just doesn't want to lift it. I can lift it like this using my other arm to take the weight of it, but under load bearing itself, I just can't do it. It's too painful. Generally speaking, that's when you need to do a little bit more than just a bit of self-rehab. That's where you'd go and see your specialist, or even just go see a doctor and sort of see what they say with some sort of scan or referral or something like that. But if we can catch ourselves in this area of the spectrum of pain without letting us get to a loss of function, which is probably one of the worst ways we can go about it, we can catch ourselves here, take ourselves through some rehab, take ourselves through some exercises, take ourselves through some mobility to be able to decrease the chances of this getting to that point. Does all that make sense for you guys? Any questions at all? Sweet to keep moving? Lovely. So generally speaking, in day-to-day life, this is what people would go through, and without any knowledge or background knowledge to do with these sorts of injuries or just the body in itself, most likely going to be people that are new to the gym, or people that don't do gym at all. That's sort of the pathway we're going to go down. To get rid of this pathway, what we want to do, I want to take us over to the wall real quick to go through a few exercises. I'm just going to sit us down over here. I'll be back in one sec, grabbing the bands. What we want to do is go through a few tests for ourselves. So the first test I want to do is checking to see whether the tightness or that inability to move is coming from whether it's the chest or whether it's your lats, your back, anything in the shoulder that might be muscular. For that example, if we're talking or looking at our pecs in general, like generally speaking, the pec is made for medial rotation. So it's going to be bringing that shoulder joint forwards. That's where the tightness in the pecs come from, that you see a lot of rounded shoulders. If we go into the lats and the tightness in the lats, they're also the insertion point of the lat, is right on the inside here or anterior side of your humerus. So even if we've got really well developed lats, which most people would think is a good thing because it's in your back and it would help pull your shoulders back, what that's actually doing is helping pull your arm back, not your shoulder back. So by that arm being back motion here, which is what the job of the lat is actually pulling your shoulder joint forward even more. So if we have super tight chest or super tight lats, or if we're down like the bodybuilders, you see a lot of the time they have really well-developed chests or really well-developed lats. They're sitting in this hunch position because the chest itself paired with the lats are going to be switching and pulling those shoulders forwards. Now, that type of tightness there and that type of positioning of the shoulder being in a misalignment is a really common cause of all these shoulder injuries that I just mentioned before. So I want to see if this is the issue and not necessarily, oh, I've hurt myself, it must be from just overuse. The first thing that I'd like to do is I want to sit up nice and straight like so. And I want to try and raise my arms directly above my head to see if I can get my arms flat against the wall. If I'm unable to do this, or I feel a lot of tightness in my chest or in my lats, generally, that's probably one of the issues going on. Not going to say that it's the direct cause, because there could be a multitude of different things. It could have been weakness in the rotator cuff itself, could have been weakness from the anterior delt pulling your shoulder forwards. But it is a big factor that the chest and the lats are so much more, I guess, developed or large in the size of what they are compared to your rotator cuff muscles, that quite obviously if your chest is overdeveloped and tight, it's going to be pulling that shoulder forward because your rotator cuff is so small compared to the size of your pec. The next one you want to do is lying flat on your back like so. I want my shoulders to be as flat as possible. I want to pelvically tilt so that my hips are up and my back is nice and flat against the ground. Really making sure, and it's really important, that my lower back is flat. Now, in a similar motion, I want to bring my arms up directly above me. And if I can't get my hands flat or rotate my hands and get them flat, generally speaking, it's going to be the lats. You might feel that in the chest as well, which is another good indication that you've got tightness in through that chest or your lat. Again, pulling that shoulder forwards. Now, when we're talking about trying to strengthen those movements or trying to get a little bit of a tension release, we can just use, I didn't bring a ball in with me, but we can just use a roller or one of those little hard balls where you'd have your hand behind your head and have a ball underneath your pec there, just rolling in and out. You want to start by having the roll or the ball on the outside of your chest here, and then slowly roll it in towards the sternum. Same thing, you want to repeat that both sides, around 30 seconds, really trying to get into any specific sore points that are in there. Likewise for the lats, you can do a few exercises or a few different rolling exercises to release the lats as well. For that one, I'd want to put a bar or a roller underneath my arm here and find a sore spot, and then take my arm through rotations on that sore spot, making sure I'm bringing my arm backwards, because as I said before, this backwards movement here is specifically what your lat's meant to do. So we want to draw the lat into a position of flexion and rotate it out into a position of extension to be able to get any of those tight knots or tightness out of the lat. They're the two main things that I'd suggest for our chest and our lats specifically. The last thing I'd say is if we've done a heavy bench day or a heavy push day and we've worked our chest out, I'd want to do some chest stretching exercises. So one specifically is you can go up to a wall, a bar, a pole, anything like that. Put your hand flat against the wall and lean into it and rotate until you feel that stretch in through the chest and in through the anterior delt. What that's going to do is open up those pathways and inflammation that we've just, good inflammation, by the way, that we've just caused from the workout and had those little micro tears. We want to open that up so that it helps prevent our chest from developing in this really tight rotated position here. Exact same thing with our lats. So if I've done a heavy back day, I've hit the lats a lot, which is the most common sort of exercise for people to do, whether it's a lat pull down, some sort of row, our lats are always going to be firing on those back days. What we want to do is do a bit of a hang. So I'd go and get a passive hang. I'd hold onto the bar. You can hold it supinated, pronated, anything like that, whatever is getting the biggest stretch for you specifically. Again, all of these exercises, all of these stretches are going to be specifically for you. So if you're not really feeling a stretch in this pronated position and you need to supinate to do it, by all means, go ahead. There's not going to be a best suited way because everyone's going to be different. So as I said, just hanging, again, you want to go for 30 seconds for a few sets just to get a lot of stretch out of those lats. Now, when we're talking about exercises specifically to get into our rotator cuff to help with any sort of injury, generally speaking, I'd say strengthening the rotator cuff itself isn't necessarily a job of one exercise, which is the most common one that everyone sees. It's having a band here and rotating it out, external rotation there. Now, there's 4 separate types of muscles that make up the rotator cuff, and those tendons are what hold the shoulder in place, like I showed in that drawing before. And now if I've got all these different muscles that do different jobs for our shoulder, I need to do more than just one singular movement. The first one that I'd suggest, going to get into the teres minor and infraspinatus, is we're going to have a band and hold it up directly above our head. Now, when we do this one, let me just get the camera looking a little bit better for you. When we do this one, we want to make sure that our positioning is supinated hands up to the sky above us. And we just want to pull that down towards our chest. Now, you'll see when I get to this position, I'm pointing my thumb down as much as I can. I'm getting a bit of external rotation down. This little bit here, that rotation is going to help switch the infra on a little bit more and the super on a little bit more. So it's not necessarily doing a singular movement that's going to hit a singular part of the rotator cuff. That rotation is going to get a lot more of the muscles involved and allow you to get a lot of flexion in through the entire rotator cuff. Again, better than doing just a singular exercise. Not to say that that exercise is bad by any means. I recommend everyone doing it. I still do it myself, but we want to be able to hit the entire shoulder and the entire workings of the shoulder through different movements that it's making us do. Otherwise, we might as well just be doing, I don't know, if we're doing bicep curls, you just sit there and do one arm and not do the other arm at all, because why not, right? So another exercise that we're going into is going to be for the supraspinatus specifically. So with this one, I'd want to be standing up or sitting down upright like this. I want to have the band around my wrist like so, my thumbs pointing out. And when I get to this position, I want to have my chest and shoulders pushed out and back so that I am in a very stiff position here. The rotation is going to come from the shoulder itself. So I want you to be able to squeeze into it and pull and rotate my thumbs back. So you'll see in this position here, I'm literally pulling my hands to my side and squeezing back as much as I can. Now, with this one as well, we're not trying to squeeze to the point that I feel it in my back or I'm feeling it in through my rear delts. This is for the rotator cuff muscles, which aren't made to handle a heap of load. But what we do want to do is push to the point that we're feeling it in the back of the shoulders and we're not getting a super big squeeze with the bands. So I'd recommend starting with something quite light and just going for a few reps until you feel a little bit of a burn. The burn that you'll feel is a lot like just the external rotation. I always recommend people starting with this one because it is a kind of uncomfortable feeling if you're not used to that sort of exercise. The last one that I want to show you guys is internal rotation. So you've probably seen these bands before. These are what a lot of physios will use or recommend you to use for that sort of movement. Our external rotation is great. We've used that one. Our medial rotation, sorry, that's not medial. This is medial. Our high band pull aparts, that's also one that's going to hit the teres major and minor. And then our banded abduction at the waist, they're all great exercises to use. But this one here is one that is underutilized and one I don't really see people doing. What we want to do is take a band or a towel or something like that. Probably best to use something a little bit thicker. Reason being, when we have our positioning like so, and I've got something a little bit thicker underneath my arm, you can see my shoulder joint here is at a bit of an angle outwards. Now, if I take that away and I squeeze my arm in, like most people would say you need to do, by squeezing in nice and tight to keep that movement just in the shoulder itself, you can see that the angle is now in here. What that's doing is putting a lot more stress onto the joint and unnecessary stress onto the joint because that humerus is tucked in and that ball and socket joint is, instead of being this angle, is now in here like so. So that rotation here is more than likely going to be putting unnecessary stress onto the back of the shoulder, which isn't going to be doing what we want it to do, which is strengthening the rotator cuff. So band or towel or box, anything like that, just to give a little bit of tension so that we have a better angle and we also have a good amount of movement there. Now, for internal rotation or our medial rotation, I'd have the band attached to something outside of me and I'd be pulling it in rather than out. This movement here is so underutilized and I think it's probably one of the ones that we need to be pushing a lot more just because of the strength that you get internally here in the shoulder as well. A lot of the times we strengthen either the back of the shoulder or the chest so much that this area here through the anterior delt and all the ligaments and stuff at the back of the shoulder tend to get too strong for the medial side as well, which is another common cause of that infraspinatus getting overly utilized just because there's no strength from the inside of the shoulder. Because when do we ever do this sort of rotation? Does all of that make sense for you guys? Any questions about any of the movements or anything that I've gone through today? We've been going for 26 minutes now, so I'm going to have to wrap it up. But if you guys do either have any more questions, or if you have any other parts of the body that you want to see get utilized in this sort of rehab scene, feel free to talk to me about it. You can see me in the gym, or email or message Fifth Element itself, and we can get that done for you guys. But that is the end of today's sort of session to do with shoulders. I hope you enjoyed. It was fun taking you guys through it. So thanks for joining.